You know that moment when you're scrolling through your feed, you see some influencer bragging about success, built $1 million business from their bedroom, quit the 9 to 5, living the dream, and you feel that itch, that twinge of envy, followed by that dull knot in your gut, because inside, you know those stories are bullshit, because you've seen the real world, the late nights, the blood, sweat, the endless uncertainty. So here's the question. What if I told you that the biggest sneaker empire in history, the one whose logo you probably took for granted this morning, was built from borrowed $50, sold out of the back of a crappy old Plymouth by a dude nobody believed in? If that doesn't piss you off, piss you the fuck on at how diluted our ideas of success have become, the overnight fame, the Insta highlight reels, then check yourself, because you're still asleep. This video is for the ones who want the real story, the messy, brilliant, chaotic grind behind success. Not the polished speeches, not the Instagram-ready motivational quotes, the real, the raw, the fight. Get ready. We're about to tear apart the myth of overnight success. Welcome to this breakdown of Shoe Dog, a memoir by Phil Knight, co-founder and longtime CEO and chairman of Nike. Before the swoosh, before the hype, before the giant ad campaigns and athlete endorsements, before the billions, Phil Knight grew up in Portland, Oregon. He was a track foot soldier, a middle distance runner under his coach at college. He went on to get an MBA at Stanford. At 24, with a head full of half-baked ambition and exactly $50 borrowed from his dad, he set out to import cheap but high-quality running shoes from Japan and sell them in America. That half-crazy idea laid the groundwork for one of the most powerful brands in human history. Shoe Dog is his brutally honest memoir of how that tiny, scrappy shoe business, originally called Blue Ribbon Sports, weathered disaster after disaster, financial breakdowns, betrayals, supply chain nightmares, lawsuits, sleepless nights, and near constant existential dread, before becoming the 30 billion plus global juggernaut we know today. Let me be clear, this video, this summary, is under the fair use doctrine, intended purely for educational, transformative commentary. We're not reproducing entire chapters, we're deconstructing ideas, calling out bullshit, adding new perspective, and digging into the chaotic human side of entrepreneurship. Because here's the truth, most people telling inspirational success stories leave out the dirt, the fear, the moments where you almost shit yourself because you realize you might lose it all. Not here. Here we get real, we dig deep, and we call nonsense out for what it is. Welcome to Mindful Reads Hub. Let's get started. The dawn of machine intelligence, why the future now has a pulse. Phil Knight didn't wake up with a business plan, a venture capitalist, a co-founder, or a trust fund. He woke up with fog, doubt, and legs that felt like wet noodles, and that was enough to rewrite history. Because before Nike became a religion, before the swoosh became an altar, it was just Phil Knight jogging down a cold Oregon road, asking himself one of the most dangerous questions a human can ask. What if I don't settle? And honestly, that's a question most people run from. Right now, half the planet is doom scrolling inflation reports, watching grocery prices climb like they're on steroids. The US economy is a circus. Europe isn't far behind, China's housing market is shaking, and everyone's pretending they're fine. Meanwhile, Phil Knight, at 24, looked at an uncertain world, a failing global economy, a generation terrified of change, and said, "Screw it, I'm gonna chase a crazy idea. Not calculate an idea, not optimize an idea. Chase it, like a man being hunted." That morning run wasn't just exercise, it was the moment a meek, introverted kid admitted to himself that he didn't want to just exist. He wanted that electric half second, the one every athlete lives for, where the world slows down and says, "Are you serious about winning, or are you just pretending?" And if we're honest, most people today are pretending, Everyone wants to build something, but nobody wants to feel stupid. Nobody wants to risk money. Nobody wants to feel like the beginner again. Phil Knight, he didn't even know who he was. He wasn't the Phil Knight of documentaries or Forbes lists or campus buildings. He was just a kid fresh out of Stanford with a thesis paper no one cared about and a stomach full of anxiety. But here's where the story gets interesting. His uncertainty was the fuel, not the obstacle. He wasn't sure if he wanted money, a wife, kids, a house. He wasn't sure he'd ever figure out life. And yet the one thing he knew, the one thread of truth he had, was that he wanted life to feel like play. Like the moment the gun goes off and everyone explodes forward. He wanted that forever. And if that meant making a fool of himself, if that meant rebelling against all the respectable paths his father paved for him, then so be it. This is where most memoirs lie, by the way. They pretend the hero always knew that destiny was clear. That's bullshit. The real innovators, from Steve Jobs to Rihanna to Elon Musk to Beyonce, all admit it. They had no clue. They just kept moving. They were running towards something blurry and nameless, the unknown. Just like Phil. This young man who had never broken a rule, never rebelled, never taken a risk, suddenly cracked open and thought, what if life is supposed to be mine? What if meaning is something you build, not something you wait for? And if you think that's dramatic, remember, this was a guy who'd never even dated. He was so sheltered he probably apologized to chairs after bumping into them, but out of that small life came a colossal thought. The world is built on crazy ideas. Democracy, crazy idea. Running as a sport, crazy idea. Athletic shoes as global fashion, insane. But so were airplanes, so were computers, so were smartphones, so is half the tech industry right now. Investors throwing billions at AI models that hallucinate 40% of the time and robots that can't open doors. But that's the point. Innovation always starts by looking stupid. What Phil had that morning wasn't clarity, it was the first hint of courage. He didn't know how to be a businessman, he didn't know how to negotiate, he didn't know how to sell, he barely knew himself. But on that misty road, he discovered something more valuable than skill or confidence, the ability to keep running, even when the finish line doesn't exist. That moment, the dawn of his idea, wasn't a plan, it was a vow. Don't stop. Run until the world gets out of your way. A vow that every immigrant entrepreneur, every first-generation hustler, every creator grinding after work understands deeply, especially today when layoffs at Amazon, Meta, and Google are becoming a quarterly ritual and the economy demands people reinvent themselves on the fly. Phil wasn't living in safer times. He was living in a Cold War, a civil rights revolution, the Vietnam era, and economic uncertainty that makes our inflation look mild. And still, he ran. Because the alternative, stopping, was worse. If there's anything worth stealing from this phase of his life, it's this. Your legs move before your courage does. Your idea becomes real before you're ready. And sometimes the only meaningful decision you can make is to go faster. Key idea. Greatness doesn't begin with certainty. It begins with motion. Phil Knight didn't create Nike from confidence, but from refusing to stand still in a world that rewards stagnation. Key takeaway. You don't need a perfect plan. You need momentum. The unknown isn't your enemy. The comfort zone is. Move first. Figure the rest out while breathing hard. Favorite quote, let everyone else call your idea crazy. Just keep going, don't stop. The first step when vision meets risk. He lands in Kobe, Japan, not because he's got a firm business, but because he's got a hunch. A young guy fresh out of business school, juggling ambition and naivete, trying to talk his way into the offices of Onitsuka, makers of the tiger shoes. He doesn't exactly have a company yet. He makes one up on the spot. Blue Ribbon Sports of Portland, Oregon. Because he remembers the blue ribbons pinned to his wall from his track days. That's his identity, his badge of honor. And he pitches like a man who believes failing isn't an option. It's not easy. There's a cultural minefield. According to the XGI Import magazine editors he meets in Tokyo, the Japanese don't operate like Americans. They don't like to be aggressively sold to. They don't like to be pressured. Instead, Knight learns something critical. Soft negotiations win. You don't barge in, you wait, you listen. You don't demand a yes. You coax it out in circles. That lesson from Japan is already proof that making something real, building a business that matters, doesn't come from swagger. It comes from humility, from sitting across a tatami mat and convincing hardened executives that you're serious, even when you're just a kid with borrowed money. He gets a deal. Onitsuka agrees to let him distribute their Tiger sneakers in the US West Coast. It's not a gold star blessing, it's a fragile contract, but for Knight, it's life or death. This deal is the lifeline for his wildest dream. On paper, Blue Ribbon Sports now exists. In reality, it's just Knight waiting on 12 pairs of mismatched shoes to arrive. He goes back home, working as an accountant, a soul-sucking, what the hell am I doing kind of job, just so he can pay rent, cover the cost of importing, and keep the little promise he made to himself. When the shoes finally arrive, 12 pairs sitting in his father's garage, he feels vindicated. It's literal proof that his vision is not delusional. He sends some Tigers to his old coach, Bill Bowerman. Bowerman doesn't just like them. He's obsessed. He's a tinkerer, a mad scientist of running, always messing with materials, always chasing faster, lighter, better. He becomes Phil's first believer, not just in him, but in the brand. Then they make a bet together. Knight orders 300 more pairs. He's not selling from a showroom or fancy store. He's selling from the trunk of his car, driving around Oregon, hitting track meets, talking to every coach, every runner, every fan he can. He pitches more than a shoe. He pitches belief. He pitches that maybe Japanese running shoes, sleek, innovative, could actually change how Americans run, that they could replace the clunky German or British brands that dominate the field, and they sell. More than Knight expects, because he doesn't just offer shoes, he offers faith. He's not just a businessman, he's a believer who happened to start a business. But this isn't a fairy tale, because the risk is real. Import contracts are fragile, shipments are delayed, Japanese executives change, and Knight, that kid pretending to run a company, has to constantly prove himself. He's not just hustling to survive, he's hustling to matter. When you compare that to today's world, where everyone seems to want to start a startup, but nobody wants to eat ramen for months, take no pay, or risk their reputation, it hits different. In 2025, we're awash with AI-fueled startup hype. We've got valuations being pushed by FOMO, tech executives calling it legacy building while markets wobble. Yet back then, all Phil Knight had was trunk space, trust in his coach, and the guts to bet young and dumb. That's the kind of vision-risk mix that matters. Not just dreaming, but putting actual skin in the game. He's not immune to fear. He worries his orders will never clear. He worries he's overpromised. He worries about banking loans. But he believes, and that belief is what turns imported Tiger shoes into American ambition. And let's not romanticize it. His naivete is a liability, but it's also his superpower. He's not trapped by the "this is how business works" conventional wisdom. He's not burdened by institutional complacency. He's willing to learn, to fail, to push, because he knows risk is the only way out of mediocrity. Key idea: vision without risk is worthless. Knight's gamble on Japanese shoes, without a company, without certainty, was the leap that made Blue Ribbon Sports real. Key takeaway: don't just dream globally, act globally. Too many people want to build empires without leaving their comfort zones. The first step to lasting impact often looks like chaos, uncertainty, and total risk. Favorite quote: if you don't have a company, invent one. Blood, sweat, and tiger shoes, building from the trunk up. He's still driving around in that beat-up car, not because he's quitting, but because that's exactly how he wins. With Blue Ribbon Sports now real, Phil Knight hustles on every track meet in the Pacific Northwest, pitching pair after pair of those tiger shoes from Onitsuka. He's not waiting for a storefront, for a fancy office, or for some venture fund to believe in him. He's selling from the trunk of his car. Think about that. The future of what would become Nike, carried in a dusty old vehicle, sweating through summer meets, talking to sweaty runners, coaches, and fans. That's not sexy. That's not viral. That's raw grind. He's not alone though. Bill Bowerman, his old college coach, becomes his partner, not just in name, but in obsession. Bowerman brings in something else. A scientist's mind, a tinkerer's spirit. He doesn't accept the status quo. He doesn't want fine shoes, he wants better shoes. He stays awake late, experimenting with different materials, talking through design with Knight. The trust they build is magnetic. For Knight, Bowerman isn't just a partner, he's a creative co-conspirator in the pursuit of something bigger than just business. Their first employee emerges from the chaos, Jeff Johnson, a barefoot runner or tracking fanatic who sells not just by name dropping but by building relationships, runs, meets, letters. He builds a mini legion of runners who believe in what they're doing. He builds trust. He builds demand. It's low budget guerrilla marketing, pre-Instagram, but it works because these guys are not just selling a shoe, they're selling a community. They're selling that feeling when your feet hit pavement, when your lungs are burning, when you know you've pushed further than before. On the financial side, it's no easier. Knight's writing checks, borrowing money, reinvesting every cent. He doesn't have profit cushions. He has faith cushions. He orders more shoes than he sold, because if he doesn't bet big, there's no growth. The risk is staggering. If the next shipment from Japan doesn't arrive, or arrives damaged or late, they collapse. Yet he pushes, because to him, not growing is death. And he sees opportunity everywhere. Athletes need shoes, but they also need better shoes. The running community isn't just customers, they're believers. At the same time, demand starts growing in ways he could hardly imagine. Track meets, coaches, athletes, they all start saying yes. His inventory flies off the trunk into the hands of people who care deeply about performance. But every win has a cost. His bank lines are tight, the Japanese supplier is infamously inconsistent, and the cash flow, it's a razor's edge. One wrong move, one delayed payment, one bad batch, and the entire dream could crumble. Here's where things get global. His gamble is not just on US track meets, he's tapped into a cross-border opportunity. The Japanese manufacturer, Onitsuka, is his supplier, a bridge between East and West. But getting that cross-continental supply isn't smooth. It comes with late deliveries, missized boxes, and cultural friction. But Knight doesn't blink. He uses those problems to deepen his conviction. He's not just building a distribution business, he's proving that a small American startup can stand toe-to-toe with established global players. His hustle is a challenge to the world. You think you have permanent advantage? Watch what a few believers can do. And here's where the commentary slaps reality in the face. Think about how many founders today talk about their global vision, talk about entering markets, but then base themselves in a Silicon Valley apartment, never setting foot abroad, never wrestling with real cross-border supply issues, foreign currency risks, or negotiating with manufacturers who don't even speak your language. Phil Knight did that in the 60s, not with $1 billion fund, but with conviction, a trunk, and a $50 loan from his dad. So yes, it's romantic in retrospect, but it was brutal then. Sweat dripping, heart pounding, uncertainty looming. They weren't just selling shoes, they were building trust. One coach at a time, one pair at a time, one risk at a time. The world will tell you to scale slow, to be safe, to minimize risk. But that's not how revolutions are born. Revolutions are born in trunks, in late night conversations, in mismatched inventory, in people who are all in when no one else is. And that's exactly what they became, not just a shoe company, but a movement. Key idea: real growth requires brutal hustle. Knight and Bowerman didn't build Nike in boardrooms. They built it from the trunk of a car, based on relationships, obsession, and repeated bets on themselves. Key takeaway: if you're building something big, you don't wait for validation. You carry your vision in your trunk, you talk to real people, and you scale with sweat because that's the only currency that guarantees ownership. Favorite quote: "We were selling more than shoes, we were selling faith." Debt, doubt, and destiny, when growth feels like gamble. He sold shoes out of his car for a while now, but the bills don't stop. In fact, they're growing faster than the inventory. On one side, there's Onitsuka, his Japanese supplier, delaying shipments, changing specifications, playing hardball. On the other side, there's his banker, breathing down his neck, telling him he doesn't have enough equity to scale this crazy little business of his. Knight's not some naive kid anymore. He's deep in his own skin, and he's starting to feel that building something real means being tethered to risk, debt, and the constant threat of failure. He leverages everything: bank loans, supplier credit, supplier trust. It's not just about cash flow, it's about survival. He doesn't have wide profit margins. What he has is hope and a ledger that constantly teeters on red. The relationship with his banker is tense. Bankers tell him to slow down, but slowing down, for Knight, means letting the dream die. So he keeps pushing, pouring every dollar he can spare into more shoes, more orders, more risk. According to the Memoir, he reinvests all extra cash back into the business, even if his bank is quietly freaking out. And then there's Jeff Johnson, the first full-time believer, who continues to write Knight letters. Long, obsessive letters about customers, sales, ideas, and hope. Johnson is not just working for a paycheck, he's working for meaning. He wants to build a community of runners, not just flip inventory. While Knight is caught between Onitsuka's unstable shipments and the bank's growing frustration, Johnson's faith becomes a kind of moral ballast. That kind of loyalty is rare, especially when the numbers don't guarantee survival. Knight's vulnerability isn't just personal, it's systemic. He realizes he's dangerously exposed to a single supplier. Onitsuka could pull the plug. Quality could slip. Contracts could change. In fact, such threats do emerge. When Onitsuka's leadership shifts, they begin to explore other distributors. Knight is terrified. He knows that if Onitsuka cuts him out, Blue Ribbon Sports collapses. So he begins to plan for backup, building his own manufacturing pipeline, thinking beyond Onitsuka, even creating a separate brand in the shadows. That's where Nike, the name that would turn into a leviathan, begins to take form, at first quietly, cautiously, but with an eye toward autonomy. Debt isn't just a burden, it's his lever, his biggest gamble. He's borrowing to import, borrowing to produce, borrowing to pay for trust. When he loses patience, he doesn't wait politely for payment. He pressures Onitsuka for better terms. When he's short on cash, he argues with his bank. He wagers that even if he might screw up, the upside is worth it. Because without risk, there's no revolution. This isn't just a dusty startup story in 60s America. His risk is global. He's depending on a Japanese manufacturer, borrowing from US banks and selling to American runners. All of these cross-border tensions amplify the stakes. Historically, companies that rely on a single foreign supplier are exposed to geopolitical risks, currency fluctuations, and supply chain disruptions. And yet, Knight leans in. He doesn't hedge every risk away. He embraces them. Now, bring that into 2025. The world is littered with entrepreneurs who talk big about risk, but few really bet their lives. Today's small business owners grapple with real cash flow risk. The Federal Reserve says credit availability has tightened for small firms, and delinquency rates are higher than before the pandemic. Interest rates have come down recently, but the lenders are still cautious. That means young founders aren't just fighting for customers, they're fighting for capital, just like Knight did, just like he had to. Every loan he took felt like a bet, not just on his company, but on his identity. And when the pressure peaks, he's forced to decide, does he fold to Onitsuka's whims or does he build something independent? He leans to independence, because real legacy isn't about dependence, it's about freedom. He starts aggressively planning to manufacture his own shoes. He begins to reduce his reliance, even if it costs him more in the short run. That's strategic, not just reckless. At his lowest points, he's terrified. He's running on faith, sometimes in himself, sometimes in Bowerman, sometimes in the runners who believe in their shoes. But he knows that if he wins, it's not just about profit. It's about proving something, that innovation doesn't come from safe bets, that a startup can be global before it's big, that someone without a trust fund can swing raw passion against established giants. In the end, his debt, his doubt, his brinkmanship become part of his identity. The risk wasn't a bug, it was the feature. He didn't just borrow money, he borrowed faith. And to some of the sharpest people out there, that's the kind of capital you can't print. Key idea: growth often comes at the expense of safety. Phil Knight's reliance on debt from banks and suppliers wasn't a sign of failure, but the very lever that allowed him to scale and maintain control. Key takeaway: if you're going to build something meaningful, you have to be willing to carry risk on your back. Debt isn't the enemy, misuse is. The right kind of borrowing can be the fuel that drives your conviction forward. Favorite quote: many cautious and conservative entrepreneurs fail. I wanted to keep my foot on the accelerator. Invention under pressure, waffle irons and broken rules. Innovation rarely strikes during board meetings. For Phil Knight and Bill Bowerman, it erupted from the strangest places, a waffle iron and a relentless need to break the rules. By now, Blue Ribbon Sports is gasping under pressure. Cash is tight, supply is volatile, Onitsuka is unpredictable, and the whole business could crumble. But Bowerman isn't just a coach, he's a mad scientist, and his lab is his garage. Bowerman sits at his breakfast table, watching his wife make waffles. The iron's grid pattern stares back at him, and in a flash of absurd genius he thinks, what if that shape could be a shoe sole? A waffle pattern sole could give grip, flexibility, and lightweight structure. Everything a runner dreams of, especially in a time when training shoes have had the same outer sole for decades. He experiments immediately, pours urethane into the waffle iron. Disaster. It seals the iron shut because he didn't add a releasing agent. But Bowerman doesn't quit. He builds a custom mold by punching holes into stainless steel, makes rubber nubs, sews them onto shoes. He gives these to his runners. One laces them up and runs like a rabbit. Knight sees it too. He's got inventory nightmares, growing debt, and a supplier relationship that could snap at any moment. But Bowerman's little experiment, ridiculous, borderline ridiculous, gives them something no one else has, a distinctive soul. It's not just design, it's survival. Here's the kicker. They don't build an innovation lab with hundreds of engineers. They innovate in a kitchen, in a coach's garage, with a wife's waffle maker. That's not just scrappy. That's revolutionary. It's a masterclass in turning constraints into fuel. When you don't have money, you don't go to Silicon Valley R&D, you go to everyday life and you ask, what if my waffle iron could be a shoe mold? And it's not just for novelty. Bowerman tests each iteration obsessively. He watches how runners' arches flex, how the rubber grips cinder tracks, how the shoe feels under stress. He treats the sole like a science experiment because it is. Over time, that waffle sole design, eventually refined into what becomes the moon shoe and the waffle trainer, becomes a cornerstone of the business. That innovation is not born from luxury, it's born from pressure. Blue Ribbon doesn't have cash for R&D. They don't have a factory of their own, but what they do have is Bowerman's obsession, his refusal to accept good enough, his belief that performance matters more than profit in the short run, that a better shoe will win hearts, sales, and ultimately survival. Now, let's pull up the real-world mirror. In 2025, companies with deep pockets and VC backing are still scrambling to innovate, but most of them rely on massive R&D teams, blockchain hype, or AI-powered design tools. Few are tinkering in garages with household tools. Fewer still are turning desperate constraints into radical product breakthroughs. Yet history, and Nike's journey, shows that when you're forced to improvise, that's when true invention happens. Constraints don't just limit you, they force you to become smarter, scrappier, more audacious. And Bowerman's waffle sole innovation isn't only a technical achievement, it's a cultural statement. It says, we don't conform, we don't follow the rulebook, we make our own. It sets the tone for Blue Ribbon / Nike's entire DNA. Relentless improvement, even when you're bleeding cash. The waffle sole is a symbol of grit, of risk, and of belief in a slippery, unproven future. Knight doesn't just ride along. He realizes that this waffle iron miracle could change everything. He pitches the mold to their manufacturers, pushes for production. He sees that to win, they need not just to import shoes, but to create shoes that no one else can make. He begins to imagine a world in which Blue Ribbon doesn't just distribute, it designs, it owns, it leads. That invention under pressure becomes their edge. And in a brutal, often hostile market, global, competitive, unpredictable, innovation is not a luxury. It's what keeps your dream alive. Key idea: genuine innovation often emerges not from abundance, but from scarcity. Under pressure, necessity forces creativity, and Bowerman's waffle iron experiment is proof that audacious ideas don't need expensive labs. Key takeaway: don't wait for perfect conditions to innovate. When your back's against the wall, use your constraints, not as excuses, but as launch pads for invention. The tools you already have may be enough. The bigger risk is ignoring them. Favorite quote: inspiration can come from quotidian things, things you might eat or find lying around the house. The IPO gamble, risking everything to change the game. Phil Knight realizes that Blue Ribbon Sports, his scrappy trunk-selling Japanese shoe importing hustle, is no longer a basement experiment. It's grown, it's bleeding cash, sure, but the scale is there. He knows he needs more than hustle, more than reinvested profits, more than Onitsuka credit. He needs capital, the kind of capital that doesn't just pay for inventory, but buys time, stability, and leverage. So he makes a decision that terrifies him. He's going public. When Nike, yes, they're already calling it Nike, launches its IPO in December 1980, the stakes couldn't be higher. That move isn't just about raising money, it's a declaration. Knight is saying, I'm done being small. I want to build something that outlives me. According to historical records, Nike went public on December 2nd, 1980, with its stock priced at $22 a share. But here's the truth he doesn't sugarcoat. Going public almost kills him. He's terrified. He's leveraged up to his eyeballs. He's asked his team to sign on for a war, not just for product market fit, but for survival. He's sacrificing privacy, control, and a huge chunk of ownership. Everyone can now see the bones of his business, the risk, the debt, the reliance on suppliers, the uncertainty of future shipments from Japan. It's not just a financial move, it's existential. He could have taken a safer route, stayed private longer, grown organically, kept Blue Ribbon roots, but he doesn't, because to him, real legacy demands risk. He's not just thinking about sales, he's thinking about culture, innovation, impact, and the market responds. The IPO gives Nike the breathing room it desperately needs. It raises capital, helps pay off shockingly large debts, and puts fuel into their innovation machine. Bowerman's experiments, Johnson's passion, their trunk sales hustle, Knight's driver's seat grit. Now they have a war chest. But with the war chest comes a new battle. Public investors demanding performance, reporting obligations, quarterly numbers, pressure to scale profitably without losing their soul. Let's pause here and reflect, because what Knight does isn't just business. It's a metaphor that still rips through today's startup world. We live in a time when going public is often glorified, fetishized, SPACs, ICOs, TikTok-fueled pre-IPO hype. But few founders truly understand the weight of that transition. Knight's IPO wasn't about flashing wealth. It was about saving the vision. He traded part of his ownership to gain structural strength. He took on external accountability so he could scale with autonomy. And what does that look like today? Look at Nike's challenges now. A recent FT report details how Nike's earnings dropped 10% in a recent fiscal year, partly due to tariffs, inventory issues, and strategic missteps. The company is still navigating the same tension Knight faced: how to innovate, scale, and deliver to shareholders without losing what made it great. When you go public, you don't just answer to consumers, you answer to the world. The pressure doesn't lighten, it multiplies. But done right, going public can transform your business from a scrappy startup into a legacy brand. Back in Knight's time, raising money publicly meant exposing every vulnerability: debt, cash flow, supplier risk, manufacturing issues. But he leaned into that exposure. He didn't run from it. Because he believed that once you're public, you can do more than just survive. You can set culture. He's not just selling shoes anymore. He's building a company that can outlast him, that can innovate because it has the capital to take really wild bets like Bowerman's waffle sole experiments or future air bubble shoes. And on the other side, there were people who believed: employees, investors, runners, coaches, people who saw Nike not just as a business, but as a belief. That's the legacy he was betting on. Key idea: taking a company public isn't just for money. It's a strategic gamble on your identity and your mission. For Knight, IPO wasn't an exit. It was a fuel injection for the vision. Key takeaway: if you're building something that matters, don't fear exposure. Risk and control can be the way to scale your impact, but you have to carry that risk with both humility and audacity. Favorite quote: no one bets on you until you bet on yourself. Nightfall reflections: what it really costs to win. Phil Knight leans back in his recliner, alone in the quiet hours, staring up at a ceiling that's now seen too much. He's built something monstrous, Nike, but now he's wrestling with the price. Not the price in dollars, not just the boardrooms and the lawyers, but the cost in sleepless nights, strained relationships, and that gut-deep fear that he could blow it all. When he reflects on his journey, he doesn't romanticize the hustle. He admits the cost, and he doesn't shy away from how raw it was. He remembers calling his father once a week from his recliner, reconstructing every threat Blue Ribbon faced. The bank notices, the unpaid invoices, Onitsuka's shifting terms. His father, back in his own recliner, listened. They didn't sugarcoat anything. Knight confesses that those conversations were more than business check-ins. They were survival therapy. He admitted to his dad that if Blue Ribbon failed, they'd lose everything, including the small house he bought in Beaverton, 1,600 square feet, a yard, a corral, a huge pine tree, and a Japanese bamboo stick. $34,000. He had saved up 20%, but he'd pledged that very savings against his loans. He told his wife Penny, "If we fail, I mean really fail, we lose more than funds, we lose our home." He wasn't just risking business, he was risking family. And that's the kind of gamble most people pretend doesn't exist. But for him, every order, every shipment, every deadline was a bet on them, on Penny, on his team, on his vision. Knight's reflections are also deeply personal. he realizes how much he sacrificed, not just cash, but intimacy, rest, and peace. His life was not neatly segmented. Our work was our life. Our life was our work, he says. Being the founder of Nike wasn't a job. It was an identity, a full-time obsession. He missed moments, watched time slip, and still wondered, was it worth it? He thinks of the people who believed in him before Nike was Nike, when cash was tight, when nobody knew what they were doing, when he was just a kid selling from a trunk. He remembers Jeff Johnson writing letters, Bowerman tinkering in his garage, Carolyn Davidson drawing a logo for $35. These weren't just teammates, they were co-conspirators in a mad mission. And seeing what they built, he feels both pride and guilt. Pride that they believed in something real, guilt for how much he made them risk. He knows he broke rules, he leaned on collaborators, he borrowed too much, he ignored safety, but in retrospect, he wouldn't change much. Because if he'd played it safe, there would be no Nike. He would have made something smaller, respectable maybe, but safe. And safe never changes the world. Yet his reflections aren't naive. He admits the darkness, the anxiety, the endless worry, the pressure so constant it became part of his psyche. He understands that legacy isn't just about success, it's about what you lose to get there. For Knight, winning Nike meant coming of age over and over again, with everything on the line every single day. In his later years, he wonders what it all meant. He reflects in 2007, as he writes, inspired after watching The Bucket List. He asks himself, have I done everything I set out to do? He's built a shoes empire, but is that enough? He remembers his grandfather, Bump Knight, traveling cross-country in a Model T, someone who embodied risk, grit, and wild possibility. He realizes that his grandfather's restless spirit coursed through him, drove him, haunted him. He gets honest. For all the money, the power, the recognition, the real legacy is less about profit and more about people. The ones who believed when no one would. The ones who ran shoulder to shoulder. The ones who risked with him. That reflection hits hard. Because most of us talk about legacy and winning as if the scorecard is just about the end game, but Knight shows us that how you win matters just as much as if you win. The nights, the fear, the debts, they matter. They carve you. They define you. Key idea, true success always demands a price, and often the darkest moments are paid in betrayal, sleeplessness, and the slow surrender of safety. Key takeaway, don't chase legacy without acknowledging what you risk. The ambition to change the world is noble, but it should never be divorced from the people who pay the steepest toll for your dream. Favorite quote, life is growth. You grow or you die. Full circle, running into the future, he sits back again, older now, quieter, with decades behind him, and he wonders, did all of this mean something? Because building a company the size of Nike isn't a clean, cinematic rise. It's messy, brutal, beautiful, and costly. The man who once sold Japanese shoes out of a car trunk is now staring at a legacy shaped in concrete, glass, global factories, and countless partnerships. He grasps that his story is not just about making shoes, it's about building a movement. Phil Knight reflects on the journey. From that freak idea run on the Oregon road, to late night calls with his dad, to boardroom fights, to the IPO, to the countless shoes that touched the feet of runners, athletes, rebels. He's not naive enough to think it was all perfect. He knows there were near-death cash crises, betrayals, missteps, and personal sacrifices. But when he looks back now, he sees something bigger than profit. He sees purpose. One of the most powerful images he conjures is of Nike's campus, Beaverton, Oregon, not just as an office space, but as a diorama of his life. Buildings named after legends, tracks where future stars run, corridors lined with memories, echoes of "just do it" in the air. In his reflection, he calls it more than headquarters. It's a monument to risk, to belief, and to human imperfection. As noted in summaries, he views the campus as a living, breathing expression of gratitude. He also thinks about the people who made this possible, not just him or Bowerman, but Johnson writing from his heart, Carolyn Davidson sketching the swoosh for $35, and every runner, every employee who believed. He doesn't gloss over the fact that none of this would have happened without them. He recognizes that legacy is communal, built in the trenches, in waffle iron experiments, in sprint meets, in legal battles, and in midnight planning. He remembers his grandfather, Bump Knight, who crossed the US in a Model T, living his life on the frontier of possibility. That spirit, risk-taking, restless, never satisfied, lived in Knight. He realizes now that Nike isn't just a brand, it's a vessel for that spirit, a way for future generations to run, struggle, and dream. He talks about meaning now, not money. In 2007, after watching the bucket list, he wonders what more is left. He confesses he still hears that voice. Don't stop, don't rest, don't think you're done. A life built on obsession doesn't come with a finish line. He still wants to tell the full story, not just the wins, but the regrets, the hundreds, maybe thousands of bad decisions. He reminds himself and everyone listening that his calling was never safe. It was never merely to make a profitable company. It was to build something that mattered, something people believed in. That's why he never settled. That's why he leaned into every crisis, every wave, every screw up, because he didn't just want to succeed. He wanted to live. He also grapples with how to give back. The legacy he built is enormous, but he's painfully aware that legacy without purpose is hollow. He proposes that the next phase of his mission isn't about revenue. It's about influence, mentoring future founders, telling the story in all its rawness, and helping others who dream as he once did. He doesn't see himself as a retired mogul. He sees himself as a teacher, a guardian of possibilities. In a world where companies go public, optimize for profit, and chase valuations, Knight's reflection is a revolt. What if the point of business isn't just to earn, but to transform? He built Nike not just because he loved shoes, but because he wanted to prove something radical. Even a crazy idea, born on a run, financed by a $50 loan, grown in risk, can turn into a global force that shapes culture. When he closes the book on his story, he isn't satisfied that it's over. He thinks, maybe it's just the beginning. Because legacy isn't a finish line. Legacy is a spark, and he's still burning. Key idea, a true legacy is more than financial success. It's the imprint of belief, risk, and people. Knight's reflections show that legacy is communal, imperfect, and deeply personal. Key takeaway, winning isn't about how big you get. It's about what you build that outlasts you. If you're pouring your life into something, make sure it's worth more than your balance sheet. Favorite quote, the cowards never started and the weak died along the way. That leaves us, ladies and gentlemen, us. Conclusion, and there it is. The whole ridiculous, miraculous, reckless odyssey of a man who started with a dumb little crazy idea and somehow turned it into a global religion disguised as a shoe company. The story of a runner who didn't want a job, didn't want a boss, didn't want permission. He wanted meaning. And meaning, as we just learned across this entire journey, is never offered freely. You carve it, you claw for it, you bleed for it, you risk your sanity, your savings, and your identity for it. Look back at the road we just traveled. It started with a kid jogging through Oregon mist, too stubborn to accept the 9-to-5 future the world expected him to lie down and take. Then he crossed oceans chasing shoes no one believed in, hustled out of a car trunk like a renegade salesman, built a company from fumes, and battled money problems so relentless they practically slept in his bed. We saw him scrape through lawsuits, factories, betrayals, and the kind of entrepreneurial anxiety that would make most people curl into the fetal position and apologize to the universe for even trying. We saw innovation not as a brainstorm session, but as a bare-knuckle street fight with physics, time, and a waffle iron. We watched a tiny imported shoe operation transform into a global brand so culturally dominant it didn't just enter the market, it rewrote the rules of it. And we saw the price tag of winning: relationships stretched, sleep lost, years burned, and moments sacrificed. And yet, with all the scars, all the doubts, all the near-death moments, Phil Knight still pushed forward because he believed there was something sacred in building something that matters. Every chapter was a lesson disguised as a punch. Every struggle was a mirror held up to us. Every breakthrough dared us to stop pretending our dreams need permission. And now, at the end of it all, when Knight looks back at the entire chaotic masterpiece, he doesn't talk about money. He doesn't talk about fame. He talks about gratitude, purpose, the people who ran beside him, the meaning forged through battles no outsider ever saw. So here's the uncomfortable truth. Most motivational nonsense won't tell you. Your dream will not feel good. Your dream will not send you inspirational quotes. Your dream will demand sacrifices you didn't put on the sign-up sheet. Your dream will require a version of you that does not exist yet. And that's the point. This whole story is a warning disguised as inspiration, a challenge disguised as a memoir, a dare disguised as advice. Because the real message Phil Knight leaves behind is viciously simple. If you don't chase the thing that keeps you up at night, life will punish you with the slow death of wondering what could have been. The cowards never started, the weak died along the way, and you're still here listening. So what's your excuse? Nike wasn't built by a genius. It wasn't built by luck. It was built by obsession, resistance, reinvention, and refusal. Refusal to quit, to settle, to ask for approval from people who never built anything themselves. So here's your final takeaway, your last gut check, your closing slap. If you're waiting for confidence, you'll die waiting. If you're waiting for clarity, you'll die confused. If you're waiting for the right moment, you already lost. Just start. Start broke. Start scared. Start unprepared. Start with a stupid little idea that makes no sense to anyone but you. Because everything meaningful, every empire, every movement, every revolution starts with a ridiculous spark someone was brave enough to protect. And if this entire breakdown lit even a tiny spark inside you, then do yourself a favor. Buy the book. Hold the pages. Sit with his story. Let it kick you in the chest properly. This summary was the appetizer, the preview, the punch, but the real power is in the full memoir. Now go do something with it. The world isn't waiting for your permission slip. It's waiting for your crazy idea, the one you keep burying, doubting, hiding, or delaying. Run toward the unknown. Run like your life depends on it, because it does.